everyone, I am Vibha Chauhan and welcome to Chauhan Classes Funda Clear. So today I'm going to start the geography for class 10th SST. Now as we have already completed the history and the political science of this class SST, and that is why I'm going to start the geography of our class 10th social studies. And in this video I'm going to explain the first chapter of our class 10th geography, and the chapter that we have got here is resources and development. So resources and development. Now do you remember the first chapter of our class 9th geography? In that chapter we discussed about resources, and this chapter is overall connected to that chapter. In that chapter we discussed everything about resources, and in this chapter we are going to discuss about resources and development. Now most of the part of this chapter we had already covered in that chapter, but there are some advanced kind of knowledge in this chapter. So basically in this chapter we are going to look at the resources and a kind of development that can be done through the resources. Now first of all, what are resources? Now resources that are anything that can satisfy our needs in terms of technological. They are technologically accessible, culturally accepted, and economically feasible. That could be a thing that could be known as a resource. Anything in our environment that can satisfy our needs, that is provided that technologically accessible, culturally accepted, and economically feasible. Now many people think that all the resources are a gift of nature, but they aren't. They are connected with human beings. You know what? That human beings themselves are a resource. That are the human resources that we also discussed in class 9th geography. Now human are the people. We are the people who transform the materials into a resource. Like for example, do you think that we would have ever considered a coal, a piece of rock, as a resource until we had known through the technology that it could be used as a resource? So you could say that the transformation of all the materials into a resource, it includes a kind of interactive relation between the institutions, technology, and the nature. You could say that it is a kind of interactive relation between the nature, institutions, and most importantly the technology, because without technology you can't just get a resource, you can't just access a resource, you could say. So you could say that is what is a resource. Now there are classification of resources as well. So let's discuss about the classification or the types of resources with our first topic, that is types of resources. Now types of resources. Now there can be different classification of resources on the basis of different things. So firstly we will discuss about on the basis of origin. So on the basis of origin, now let's discuss about the resource, the classification of resources on the basis of origin. Now on the basis of origin, they can be classified into two types, that are biotic and abiotic. That also we discussed in class 9th, didn't we? So let's kind of recap it. Now biotic resources are those resources that are the living resources, like the forest life, wildlife, you could say flora and fauna, fisheries, livestock, and most importantly human beings themselves. So we can say that biotic resources are all of those resources that are living things, kind of living organisms. Living things are all the biotic resources. Now secondly, there is abiotic resources, just opposite of biotic resources, that have the non-living components in them, like metals and rocks. So metals and rocks that are also resources, but they are abiotic resources as they have the components of non-living things. So they are non-living things, and that is why we call them abiotic resources. Now that was on the basis of origin. Now on the basis of exhaustibility, they can also be divided into two types. Now first is renewable and second is non-renewable resources. Now renewable resources that can be renewed or replenished quickly, you could say, like for example you could say that solar and wind energy, water. These are the examples of renewable resources that can be renewed or replenished over quickly, you could say. Now you could say that they can never end, you could say, because they always renew themselves. They can always be renewed, and that is why they can't be just ended that way. They can't be ended by just factory. And non-renewable resources that are just completely opposite of renewable resources. Now, non-renewable resources that take a very long time in you could say that a long time for being renewed or for being replenished, like for example coal or the fossil fuels. Now these are the things that take millions of years to be replenished or renewed. That is much more, that is so far much than a human age, than an average human age. So you could say that in terms of geography, in geological age, they take a long of time, they take so much time to be renewed or be replenished, and that is why when they have renewed, we can't just see that whether they have renewed or not. So you could say that they always get a kind of, they can always be ended. So like coal or the fossil fuels can always end because they cannot be renewed or replenished that easily, and that is why we call them non-renewable resources. So on the basis of exhaustibility, that is how far they will exist in the world or how soon they will exhaust. So you could say that on the basis of exhaustibility, they can be classified into two types: renewable resources and non-renewable resources. Now on the basis of ownership, they can also be divided into three types. Well, on the basis of ownership, they can also be divided into four types. Now, firstly, they can be divided as individual ownership property or individual ownership resource. That is, that the ownership of that resource, of that specific resource, is by an individual. Like you know that all that pasture land, plantations, and ponds, these are something that are owned by an individual, and that is why we call them individual ownership resources. Now, as for the opposite, there are community-owned resources. Like in villages, in rural areas, there are many things, many plots and many things that are kind of owned by community. That community can be based on anything, but that particular land, kind of ponds in the villages, public parks, or the village common grounds like the burial grounds, the grazing grounds, those are the community-owned resources, you could say. So those are owned by whole community. Now thirdly, the third type of classification into this origin, into this basis, could be of national resources. Well, all the resources of any nation is known as a national resource. For example, in India, all the resources are directly or indirectly owned by our nation, by our government, and that all the government has the right to acquire any land anytime. You must have seen that railways and other roads are being any kind of construction site, any kind of construction work that is being done on a plot, on a land of some that is owned by an individual. So you could say that they have the right, the government has the right to acquire any land or plot for the public use, for the public work. So you could say that national resources, all the resources belong to the nation. They are all the national resources. And you know what, that in oceanic era, what happens that in oceanic area, all the resources in 12 nautical miles or 22.2 kilometers is a national resource. So you could say that from the region which has been bounded as a coastal territorial boundary for a country, from that region to 22.2 kilometers or 12 nautical miles, all the resources that lie in that area are the national resources for a country. Now there are international resources as well. Like for example, there are many institutions, international institutions, which own many of the resources of whole world. Now in those resources, there isn't any kind of ownership by a single country. All the countries, any single country does not have any right for utilization of those resources that fall under that region. You know what, that if there is an ocean there, like for a Pacific Ocean or an Indian Ocean, now what would happen that there are different countries, they would take their resources that lie to 12 nautical miles or 22.2 kilometers, but that area that is remaining, there will be conflict, dispute between those countries for those resources that lie in that area in the middle of Indian Ocean or anywhere. So for that dispute, there is that ownership of those resources are in the hands of the are in the hands of international institutions. So you could say that there are international resources as well. Now those rights of resources might be given to any country in some special cases. So you could say that these are the four types of four classification on the basis of ownership. What were they? They were the individual owned, proper individual owned ownership, kind of individual ownership resources, then community owned resources, then national resources, and international resources. Now there can be classification based on status of development as well. So on the basis of status of development, you know what, that how much that resource has developed, we can also classify those resources into this classification. Now firstly, let's discuss about potential resources. Now potential resources are those type of resources that have not been surveyed for utilization, particularly, for example, in India, the regions of Western India, particularly Rajasthan and Gujarat. Now in those states of our country, there is so much solar and wind energy, but still they have not been surveyed for their utilization. So those resources that are there but we have not utilized them are known as potential resources that have the potential into them. Now second classification into this basis could be of that developed resources. Now all those resources that have been utilized are known as the developed resources. Now developed resources are kind of, you know what, that those kind of resources that are there that have been utilized, that can be used but are still or not used. So those all types of resources that have been utilized by the government of our country are known as developed resources. Now there is stocks as well. Stocks are kind of all those resources that are there that have been utilized, surveyed, and we know that we can use them. But still what is happening that we don't know the methods, techniques, or we don't have the enough technology to access that. For example, water consists two gases that are hydrogen and oxygen. Now hydrogen is very important for generating energy, but we don't know how to, for what purpose we should use it, or we don't know the technology for know how to use it. So we could say that though all those materials, all those resources for which we don't know, we don't have the technology for know how to use it, so we can say that those are known as stocks that are in our country that can be used, but we don't have the technology, that cannot be used still. Now reserves, the fourth and last classification onto this basis could be reserves. Now reserves are a subset of stocks. Now you know what, reserves are a subset of stocks. Reserves are kind of all those resources that can be used at any time. We have the technology for know how to use it, but we are still not using it, or we are not using to at a very large extent. For example, we know that the river water can also be converted into hydroelectric power, but still we are not making hydroelectric power from the river water. So you could say that, for example, this kind of resources could be that river water, dams, or the forest reserves could be a very good example of this type of resources. So we discuss four classification onto this basis as well, that are the developed resources, potential resources, the stocks, and the reserve resources. So we can say that there are classification on the basis of origin. There are two classification, biotic and abiotic. After that we have renewable and non-renewable resources on the basis of exhaustibility, and further renewable resources can be classified into continuous or flow. After that, on the basis of ownership, we discuss four classifications that are international, national, then individual, and community owned resources. After that, on the basis of this type, on the basis of the status of development, we discuss four classifications as well, that are potential, developed, and the stocks and the reserves. So we discuss about the classification, the types of resources. Now the next topic that we have got here is development of resources. So development of resources. Now till now we discussed about the classification of resources, but now human beings have been using all the resources indiscriminately. That has led to many problems that we face today. Now what is happening in our country is that in all all over the world, not just in our country. What is being done in all over the world or in the earth is that there is getting more and more gap between rich and poor. What is happening that there is indiscriminate use of all the resources just in the hands of few. Like for example, the society has been divided into two groups that are haves and have-nots, that are the rich and the poor. So we can say that there is an indiscriminate use of all the resources just in the hands of a few people of all over the world. And secondly, there has been so much use of resources that has led to depletion of resources. You know what, that so much resources are being used by the people, by the human beings for their greed, and that is why what is being happening, what is being done, what is happening all over the world is that there is a kind of so much of depletion of all the resources, not just of one type of resource. That just take as an example like water or the fossil fuels or the energy. So we can say that anything we can say that has led to depletion of the resources like the forest or the wildlife, we can say. After that, it has led to global problem as well for the earth as well, like the global warming, ozone layer, that ozone layer depletion. So we can say that you could say that so much use of the resources has led to a kind of global crisis as well, a threat to whole earth as well, like the ozone layer depletion or the global warming, or many problems there are. So we can say that there are so many problems, there can be so many problems because of so much use of the resources, of all the resources. And if this trend of all the depletion of resources, so much indiscriminate of resources continues, then our earth is in danger, our future is in danger. And that is why we need to we need to have a sustainable development. That is, sustainable development means that sustainable development is a kind of development that is, we are using things in such a way that it would be left for future generations as well. So sustainable development is a kind of a goal or a development for saving all the resources for future generation as well. So we can say that we need to have more and more sustainable development. We have to sustain life for the future generation as well, and that is why development of resources is very necessary, compulsory, essential, very important for the life, for the quality and quantity of the life. You know that resources are not just meant for life, but they are meant for quality of life as well. So we can say that for quality, quantity of life, and for the life we need resources, and we need sustainable development as well for the future generations, as we have been given all the resources from our ancestors, so we must save to future generations as well. Now let's take a look at the kind of resource planning that is very important for the development of resources with our next topic, that is resource planning. So resource planning. Now resource planning, that is very important for a country like India, like our country that is India. You know what, that in our country there is so much diversity of resources as well for the availability of the resources. We can say that in some areas it can be that they are very rich in minerals but lack in some other kind of resources, and in some regions or states it could be that they are not that much rich in minerals, but they are kind of have so much different types of minerals. Like for example, states like Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand or Orissa have so much energy minerals like coal minerals, coal mines, and those type of resources, energy resources. And Arunachal Pradesh has abundance of water. But if you look at Rajasthan, what is there? That there is no infrastructure. There is a lot of solar and wind energy in Rajasthan, but there is no infrastructure resources, there is no water, there is no kind of minerals, vital minerals necessary to sustain life in Rajasthan. So we can say that there can be a lot of diversity in our country on the basis of resources as well. Like for example, let's take an example of Kashmir, Ladakh region, that has a kind of a very mere population because it is a sparsely populated area because of its temperature, climatic conditions, and because of the availability of resources as well. Well, there's a lot of resources in that region, cultural heritage in that region, but there is no infrastructure resources, there are no vital vital mineral resources that are available, that should be there, like water that is very important to sustain life, that is not present in Ladakh. Well, it is present, but that does not mean that it is necessary. It is sufficient for sustaining life. So we can say that in India, what is happening in our country is that in some areas they are very rich in minerals, rich in resources, but there is deficiency of resources as well. There is a mere availability of different kind of resources in different regions as well, and that is why we need resource planning for the local, regional, national, and for the whole country boundaries region. So we have to kind of have a resource planning that should be for the local level, for the regional level, and for the national level as well. So we can say that resource planning, that for sustaining, for saving the resource, for development of resource, a planning that is being done by the government, and that has to be followed by the citizens of that country. So resource planning is very important in developing countries like India or any developing countries. Now let's discuss about resource planning in India. So resource planning in India. Now, just as I said that resource planning is very important for our country, and you know what, that as soon as we started our first 5-year plan, that we had taken a kind of step towards the resource planning, because in that first 5-year plan, you know that in our country now the name has been changed, but the same has been done. You know what, in our country what was there, that there was a 5-year plan, that is for every upcoming 5 years there was a plan for all the economic, financial conditions, budget of the country, and all those things, for the situation of the country, for the kind of expenditures, and for overall thinking situation conditions of the country. So that was for a kind of planning for the next upcoming 5 years, and as soon as we started this, our first step towards the resource planning had been taken, and there could be some steps that we can discuss here for the resource planning that has been taken in our country, that has to be and has been taken as well in our country. Firstly, we need to have an identification and an inventory of all the resources through surveying all the regions of our country, through mapping, and for the qualitative and quantitative purposes of all the resources. So we have to identify all the resources and have a kind of invention towards those resources as well, kind of identification and inventory of all the resources by, you could say that by different methods, by mapping, by the surveys, and that we need to have qualitative and quantitative methods of all the resources. After that, there is a need of more and more technology, skilled people, and human resources, of course. So we can say that technology skills are very important for conserving the resources, for the conservation of resources, for the resource planning as well. And all the resource planning should be in the correspondence of all the national development plans. So all those methods or development plans that are for the resource planning should be with the correspondence, with all the national development plans as well. Now, in our country, what can be seen is that in our country there are many regions who have a lot of resources, who have a lot of minerals, but are still counted as economically backward states, economically backward regions, and there are many regions which are not we don't have so much minerals or so much resources in them, but still they have been counted as the economically forward classes. Like you could say that they have been counted as economically upward states. So why is it so? You know what, that a kind of mere availability with correspondence with technology and skill leads to more and more problem. So even if there is an availability of all the resources, there is a need of technology and skill of all the people and human resources. So we can say that if there is availability of all the resources, then still there is a need of technology, there is a state of institutions, there is a need of skills of all the people, or we could say that in other terms, human resources. Now in India, what could be seen that there are many experiences of these things in our country through colonization. During the period of colonization, what could be seen was that all the foreign invaders had been attracted towards our country for all those resources, and because they have the technology, that is why they could use all those resources. So we can say that because of their kind of very good technology, very high technology and skills of the people helped them for having the use of all the resources. So we can say that even if we have the resource in any state or a region, still we need to have technology, more and more skills, and skill the people as well, institutions in that country, and more development in that region. So we can say that is a resource planning in India. That is that all the resource planning plans in our country has been made through with the correspondence after seeing the national development plans. So we can say that is the resource planning in our country in India. Now the next topic that we have got here is conservation of resources. So conservation of resources. Now as all of you know that resources that are very important for any nation, and you could say that there is a lot of use of resources as well, and it could lead to economical profit as well for a nation or a country. But the overuse of all the resources can lead to a kind of environmental problems as well as socio-economic depletion, socio-economic loss in any nation, and that is why there is a need of conservation of all the resources. We can see the traces of all the political leaders, historical leaders, or all the books that have been written in history over long years ago about the conservation of resources. Let's take an example of Mahatma Gandhi, who after that he raised his voice for the conservation of resources. He said that there is enough for everybody's need, but not for anybody's greed. So we can say that he said that there is enough materials or resources for everybody's need. There is a man that he needs for his survival or some kind of use for as well, but there is nothing enough or sufficient for anyone's greed, because as greed is satisfied, the greed can never be satisfied. Once it is satisfied, it again becomes more, and it becomes a vicious cycle. So we can say that is why we can see the traces of over long history ago as well for many historical leaders, many political leaders, about the conservation of all the resources. So we can say that there is a need of conservation of resources as well, and it's very important to conserve all the resources. Now after that we have got to discuss about land resources. So land resources. Now a bit of this you might already know about land resources. Land that we live, on which you are standing maybe, or on which your bed is maybe. So we can say that land is all the land that is in the earth, and land is we perform all the economic activities, transport, communication systems, our buildings, for housing purposes, for agricultural purposes, and for all things we use land, don't we? So we can say that for all these activities we need land, and land can be beneficial for economical purposes as well, as we make manufactories, industries, and all the buildings on the land. So we can say that land is also a resource, as it can satisfy our needs, and very careful we have to use it as well. And now let's talk about the land resource in our country as well. Now land resource in our country can be seen in 4 different forms, in which one we are not going to discuss. Now four of all the forms that can be seen in our country are the plateaus, plains, mountains, and in some parts it could be islands. Well, there is a very little amount of all the islands in our country. So we can say that these are the forms of land resources that can be seen in our country, or you could say that mostly in many countries, and all the countries, mostly in all the countries. Now these are, if you talk about the percentage of all the land coverage in our country, then then it would be that mostly 43% of all the land area in our country is the plain area. That is, we use for making roads and we use for making public parks and all those parks and buildings, factories and all those material of buildings, factories, housing complexes, all those things, all those buildings you could say that are made on a plain area. After that, 30% of all the land area in our country is the mountain area that is used for tourism and for ecological benefits. Now that 30% of all the mountain area is in Kashmir region, in the Himalayas region and all those regions. Like in some, there are some mountain ranges in our country like Vindhyan ranges, Aravalli ranges in our country. So in that region there is 30% of all the land surface in our country. Now remaining 27% of all the land surface in our country are all the plateaus region in our country. Now all that 27% of all the plateaus lie in Maharashtra region and in that region, like Deccan Plateau region, and in plateaus we have got a lot of reserves of all the mineral resources. So we can say that in those plateaus we have got a lot of resources like minerals, vital minerals and many other things in those plateaus. So in one way or another all are beneficial. Now the land that you're standing or your house has been built is a plain area. Plateaus are a kind of rough areas with a kind of little bit high and low rising areas. After that we have mountains, as all of you know that what types of mountains there are. So we can say that these three are the types of land that can be seen in our country, and that is, we have talked about the land resources. Now let's talk about land utilization. So land utilization. So now let's discuss about the land utilization. Now I'm going to discuss about 5 land utilization. Like you know that we have utilized land in 5 ways. Now fourthly, we are talking about land utilization for our country, and we are going to discuss about 5 land utilization methods. Now fourthly, we have utilized in the name of forests. Forests, as all of you know that what kind of land they are, that there are so many trees and we call them groves as well. After that, there is a land that we call as uncultivated land. Now in uncultivated land, there are all the lands that are used for settlements, for railways, for industries, for factories, for construction sites, and maybe all those lands. And a land that has been left for uncultivated for many years, for many agricultural years. After that, we have the uncultivated land in other ways, you know, that fallow lands. Now in fallow lands, there are 2 types of fallow lands that we can have. Firstly, the current fallow lands that has been left uncultivated for less than or maybe 1 year in agriculture, 1 agriculture year, or maybe less than 1 agriculture year. And next could be, that is the other type of fallow land is that has been left uncultivated for a kind of 5 years of agriculture, 5 agriculture years. After that, you could say that we have a nat zone area, nat zone crop area, that is known as, you could say that also known as gross crop area. Now in a year, how much a kind of, in a year, even if once there is an agriculture on an annual land, it would be known as a kind of nat zone area, that is NSA, nat zone area. Now you could say that all the agricultural land that has not been left uncultivated is known as the nat zone area. After that, we have discussed about 4. Now there are pastoral lands as well. Pastoral lands or grazing lands that has been left uncultivated. So you could say that these are the land utilization that we use for today. So you can say that in these ways we have utilized the lands. After that, let's discuss about land use pattern in India. So land use pattern in India. Now what is the pattern of land use in our country? There is no such thing. You know what, that there isn't the kind of equal pattern, equal proportion of pattern in all the states of our country. Well, we can only survey the 93% of all the land area of all the land use in our country, because the remaining all, you know, that the surveys of northeastern states excluding Assam are all the data that we cannot have. Like in Nagaland, there are many tribes, you could say that they have their own rights, and that is why we cannot have a data of those northeastern states. After that, we have the dispute of Jammu and Kashmir as well. Like some of the part of Jammu and Kashmir has been occupied by Pakistan and China as well, and that is why on that land we cannot have a survey. So we can say that we have the databases of 93% of total land surface area of our country. Now on that land, you know what, that there is no such thing like equal proportion of all the land use. Like if you talk about net zone area or NSA, like in some states like in Punjab or in Haryana, it is more than 80%, but in other states like Arunachal Pradesh or in many other states that very low, there is a very low agricultural rates. So we can say that in Punjab and Haryana there is so much NSA, but in Arunachal Pradesh, in Odisha, in these regions, not in states, there is a very less kind of all those NSA area, like all those net zone area. So we can say that those are the kind of diversity of all the land use pattern in our country, because in one way or another, in all the states of our country, they have to use in another ways. Like for example, even if we conclude all the net zone area with all the agricultural lands and all the fallow lands, still it is 54%. Well, when it is joined with all the fallow lands, then it becomes 54%. And if we talk about the forest land of our country, it is less than 33%. That is designed by the National Forest Policy in 1952 for the ecological benefits, for the ecological purposes, and for the millions of people in our country who are living in our country, because they are they are being supported, or they depend on the fringes of the forest. So we can say that for so many millions of lives to live in our country, for all that ecological balance, we need to have at least 33% of all the forest area in our country. But if you look at the map of 2015, you could see that only 23% of all the land surface area in our country is just forest area. That is not sufficient for all the people, and that leads to many diseases of the people as well. So you could say that there is no such proportion of land use pattern in our country. People just use, even if you look, this is a moral value, but if you look at the potential reasons, if you look at the more and more grand reality, then people just use as per their needs. They don't think that they need to do this or that. If you look at the pastoral lands or the grazing lands, what we can see in our country is that they are decreasing. So think that there is so much population of all the pastures in our country. What about their grazing? How will we feed them if we don't have the grazing lands or the pastoral lands? You know that land use pattern of all of our country depends on many factors, on natural factors as well as the human factors. Natural factors, that are the topography, climatic condition, type of soil, the condition of soil, all those things. And the human factors are like population density, technological development in that region. So all that availability of facilities, cultural regions, and traditional regions as well. So we can say that there can be natural as well as human factors kind of having an impact on the land use pattern in our country, because you could see that there is so much land used for agriculture in states like that Punjab, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, but you can't see that much in Jammu and Kashmir or in snowy areas or in mountainous areas, you could say. So you could say that there is a kind of a lot of diversity in our country in such regions as well. Now the next topic that we have got here is land degradation and conservation measures. So land degradation and conservation measures. Now you know what, that we have shared our land with our ancestors, with our past generations, and we'll have to do with our future generations as well. So we have to conserve land for future generations as well. We have to sustain land. But you know what, that there are so much there, we can see a lot of land degradation in our today's life, in our everyday life as well, due to mining, due to overgrazing, due to deforestation, degradation, there are many factors that are leading towards the degradation of the land, and that is why we can see a lot of examples in many of the states, not in the many of the states, in almost all the states of our country. Like for example, in Madhya Pradesh, in many states like in Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand and Orissa, there is a kind of so much mining that is leading to deforestation in those states. Now what happens after mining is done, after mining is done, after mining is excavated, the land is just left barren, leaving all the traces of overburdening. And you know what, that land degradation can be done by human beings, caused by human beings, but in indirect ways we kind of cause a damage to lands through nature as well. Because of so much deforestation, there can be earthquake as well. You know, now due to so much deforestation, there can be earthquake in that area. So we can say that we just not kind of cause a damage for the land degradation, but we also invite many calamities, many natural calamities for land degradation. So we can say that there are so much land degradation in our country. Like for example, in Western Uttar Pradesh, in Himachal Pradesh and in Punjab, there is in Haryana region as well, there is so much over irrigation, and that is leading to water logging. So you can say that due to that there is also a lot of land degradation that could be seen, because so much irrigation, so much agriculture on a land can also be a problem. So you could say that in many states like in Maharashtra, in Madhya Pradesh, in these states what happens that there is overgrazing. You know that in pasture lands there is so much overgrazing, and that is why it is leading to land degradation. So there are many factors affecting the land leading towards the land degradation, and there can be measures as well. Like we have to maintain the grazing of all the pastures, of all the that livestock that have been domesticated by the people. After that, we have to stabilize our needs of the land. We have to stabilize the use of the lands in our everyday life. After that, we have to have more and more afforestation. That is, we have to plant more and more trees so as to increase the forest area, as well as to have more and more plants and trees in our country. You know what, that we are dependent on the land. 95% of our all like clothing, food and shelter come from land. So we can say that 95% of our life comes from land. So we can say that is why land is so important, and we must conserve it. We have many measures, but we have to follow as well, don't we? That cannot be seen in our country. There are not all the people are following all the rules or all the measures that have been kind of guided by the government. You know what, that we have to make it more and more practical in our country as well. What is being done in our country is that there are so many measures like afforestation, stabilizing our pastures, and do less mining. After that, we don't have to overburden the land that we are using, those things. But are we really following all those measures in our everyday life? Are you really following all those measures? You aren't, are you? So you could say that is why every person needs to follow all those procedures, all those measures to conserve the land resource, because land resource is very important for our life. You know that land resource is a very important resource, but has a finite magnitude, and that is why it can deplete easily. It can degrade easily, we can say. So you can say that it has a finite magnitude, and that is why we need to conserve it more and more. Now let's discuss about next resource, that is soil as a resource. So soil as a resource. Now let's take the viewpoint of our vision, that is, we have to look at soil as a resource. Now you look at soil, I think in almost every day you must have seen soil even today as well. So you can say that the soil, that is also a resource, that is the most important renewable resource. So we can say that soil is also a resource and kind of is very important for the plant life and supports the growth of the plant and many living organisms on the the earth. You know that there are many factors in the formation of the soil, like the parent or the bedrock, like the time, kind of many changes, like chemical properties, organic matter, the type of soil can vary from these factors. So in formation of soil there are many things like weathering, like the parent rock or the bedrock, or the time that it has been taken. And you know what, that it takes many years, a million of years, for soil to have a depth of few centimeters. So it takes many years for soil to have a depth of few centimeters. And there are many factors affecting the soil, like the that running action of water, wind and glaciers. After that, the cultivation on that soil, the kind of grazing over that soil. So there are many factors, chemical factors as well as chemical properties are there in the soil. And in the soil there is organic matter, that is a humus, that is also important for its formation and is present in the soil. So we can say that there are all the matters, all these things like weathering, time, all those chemical properties, that parent rock and the bedrock are equally important in the formation of soil. And the change in the soil is because of the wind, glaciers, snow, water, all those things. So we can say that there can be soil erosion as well, that we'll discuss later. So we can say that is a soil as a resource, and on the basis of age, color, texture and formation and all those things, in India there can be classification of soils as well. So now let's discuss about the classification of soils with our next topic, that is classification of soils. So classification of soils. Now in India there can be different types of soil depending on the climatic condition, that climatic condition, the vegetation and all those matters of climate, temperature and that running water action, glacier and snow. So we are going to discuss about the classification of soils, or the types of soils that can be found in India. Let's start this with our first type of soil, that is alluvial soil. So alluvial soil, that is the most important, or I would say that the most widespread soil type in our country. In fact, all the northern plains of our country are formed of this type of soil, alluvial soil. Now they have a rich content of humus in them as well, and that they are rich in potassium and kind of phosphoric acids and lime. So we can say that it is a kind of composition of this type of soil. Now alluvial soil can be formulated, you could say that there are three main rivers, there are three main Himalayan rivers by which alluvial soil it can be found, from where alluvial soil comes from. Now those three rivers are, obviously you might have already know, that are the Ganga, the Brahmaputra and the Indus river. Now these three are the most important rivers for the formation of this type of soil, alluvial soil. In the northern states like in Uttar Pradesh and in the whole northern plain, you will see this type of soil because it has potassium rich in carbonate, that carbonate calcium, and it has the that phosphoric acids and lime. That is why there can be crop, there can be agriculture, cultivation of sugarcane, paddy crops and all the pulses and cereals. And that is why you might have noticed that in Uttar Pradesh there is a high cultivation of sugarcane. Uttar Pradesh is a leading producer of sugarcane in our whole country. That is because of the alluvial soil. In our state, that in Uttar Pradesh there is a high produce of wheat as well. That is also because of this type of soil. So we can say that in whole northern plains and in the southeastern coastal areas there is a little kind of this type of soil that can be found, and it also goes narrowly. There is a narrow corridor of this type of soil towards Gujarat and Rajasthan, towards the western part of our country. Well, that is a narrow corridor, you could say, that is of the alluvial soil. So we can say that alluvial soil, that is a kind of soil that is the most widespread soil of our country, and in fact all the northern plains are made through this. It is rich in those materials that I said, and sugarcane, paddy crops, wheats and cereals can be grown on this type of soil. Now next type of soil that we are going to discuss is black soil. So black soil. Now black soil that you might know already. Black soil that is the most important, that only on which cotton can be grown. You know what, that black soil are generally in black color, and that is why they are known as black soil. And you know what, that they are also known as irregular soils in our country, and they are mostly found in the regions of Maharashtra, Saurashtra, and you know that Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh in a little bit as well. And you know what, that in black soil cotton can be grown, and because black soil are very rich in the fine material that is a clay material, so they are very rich in clay, and that is why they are very important for cotton to be grown into this soil. Now in hot season, what happens that there are so many kind of you know that cracks on this type of soil that we also see in the cotton fields in hot season, and in that what happens that they become so kind of you know that after the first shower it needs to be tilted immediately, otherwise it will be very difficult for crops to be grown onto this soil. So we can say that after first shower it needs to be tilted immediately by the people. After that, black soil that is commonly found in Maharashtra in the Deccan region, that is the Deccan tract that is known as basalt region. You know that it is a kind of region of Deccan Plateau, and because there is no phosphoric acid, there is no phosphoric content in this type of soil. There is only so much, you know that all the rich materials or salts are present in this type of soil, like magnesium, potassium, carbon, calcium, and also all those that I saw clay material. So we can say that it doesn't have any kind of phosphoric contents, but it does have all the rich minerals of the soil. So we can say that is a black soil. Now one thing that we left in the alluvial soils. Now alluvial soils can also be classified into two types of alluvial soils depending upon their age. Now as old alluvial soils that are known as the Bangar, and the new alluvial soils that are known as the Khadar. Now Bangar then have kind of so much rough, they are so much coarse, and you know that less fertile than compared to the Khadar type of soil. You know what, there are so much canker particles, canker that is a small particles that we see in the soil. So canker modules are so much in this type of soil, in the old alluvial soil, and they are less in the new alluvial soil, and that is why they are more fertile compared to old alluvial soil. Now alluvial soils that are kind of so much coarse or kind of have so much grains near the slope of the riverine but when they are near the crack of any river basin or any river beach, there is so much grain, or coarse, but after that they are very fine, you could say, suitable for you know that agriculture or for cultivation. So that is alluvial soil. And now we discussed about the black soil. Now next type of soil that we are going to discuss are red and yellow soils. So red and yellow soils. Now it is not that these are two different type of soils. Now they are formed in the very kind of dry regions where there is very less rainfall in those regions. You know what, that red, that after when it is formed in hydrated regions it becomes yellow soil. So you can say that red and yellow same type of soil but can be seen in different colors in different time formation. Now red and yellow soil are kind of so much formated in hydrated regions, in less rainfall regions, and in the eastern part, you know that in the eastern part of Deccan Plateau, in the region of Chhattisgarh, and in the region of Chhattisgarh in Odisha. So we can say that in the eastern part of the Deccan Plateau, in those regions red and yellow soil can be found. After that we can also have traces of these type of soils in the western part, in the western coast of our country. So that is about the red and yellow type of soil. Now obviously they are you know that their color is because of the diffusion of iron on crystalline, igneous or metamorphic rocks. So you can say that any soil that is on an igneous rock or on metamorphic rocks, they are red or yellow soils. Well, they are red or yellow soils in color because of the diffusion of iron present in them. So they are present in the crystalline, igneous rocks or the metamorphic rocks. After that we have got the type of soil that is a Ladywright soil. So ladywright salt. Ladywright, you know what, that the name of this salt has come from a Latin word that is a later. Now that later does not mean that is used in English. That later means that bricks in Latin. So you could say that this type of salt that is found in the Kerala, Karnataka region and in Assam as well. So you can say that in the western part of our, in the southern part of our country and in northeastern part of our country. Now you know what, that they are very kind of less fertile. They aren't that much fertile for cultivation, but if they are treated, because these type of soil are very prone to degradation, to erosion, and that is why they need to be treated very carefully. And when they are treated by the people so much carefully, then in regions like Kerala, in regions like Assam, tea can be grown on this type of soil, and in some regions of Tamil Nadu and of Karnataka, they are very suitable for cashew nuts to be grown. So we can say that they need to be treated for becoming fertile soil or for cultivation. So only after that any crop can be grown, and most importantly they are for the beverages like tea and coffee, and even in that there is more and more tea in our country. And in some regions like Tamil Nadu and in Karnataka, they are for the cashew nuts that have grown. You know that in Tamil Nadu and Karnataka there are so much cashew nuts that are sold cheaply than compared to Uttar Pradesh or any other northern state. So you could say that is because then those crops have been grown in that region. After that we have got the soil type that is the arid type of soil. So arid soil. Now arid soil that are commonly found in the arid regions aren't today. Now they are found in the regions like Rajasthan. Now mostly in deserts they are found. You know what, that arid that are very dry soil and I have a very loose particles. And after that there are very less kind of vegetation that is going to be grown on this type of soil. And even after very much treatment, even after very much irrigation in Rajasthan, difficulty, you could say that after so much difficulty there is a less possibility, there is a less possibility of high chances of irrigation on this type of soil. So you can say that even after so much kind of processes, repercussions on this type of soil, then only a little bit of vegetation or cultivation can be done on this type of soil. So arid type of soil that can be seen in deserts, in that in Rajasthan, in arid regions. So you can say that are the arid soil. After that, the last type of soil that we are going to discuss are forest soil. So forest soil. Now forest soil that are found in the mountainous regions, in the hilly regions like in the Jammu and Kashmir, in those regions, and they are very loamy and silty. They can be very fertile as well depending on the region they have been formed, and their depth also depends on the region they have been formed, whether they are on the slope of a mountain or in the mountain, or where they are formed in a mountain. So we can say that in Jammu and Kashmir, in those regions, these type of soil are mainly found. In Himachal Pradesh, in Jammu and Kashmir, in those regions where there are Himalayan mountains, and some of the parts of northeastern states as well. So we can say that these are forest soil that are very loamy and very silty. Now you might have seen that because of snow, because of so much glaciers, that is why you could say that there is a lot of variation in this type of soil as well. So we can say that forest soil that we discussed just now. Now 6 types of soil that we discussed just now. Now we discussed about alluvial soils that are most widespread soil of our country. After that we discussed about black soil. After that we discussed about many soil like ladywright soils. Now one important thing about ladywright soils, that humus is present in ladywright soil, but if there is no vegetation around that soil, then it is probably that there would be no humus in ladywright soil. So it depends on the vegetation around the ladywright soil as well for the humus present in it. Humus, as all of you might already know, that organic matter. So you can say that these are the type of soil like ladywright soil, black soil, arid soil, forest soil, and that all red and yellow soils, and the alluvial soils that will be discussed just now. Now next and last topic of this chapter is soil erosion and conservation. That is the soil erosion and the soil conservation. Now let's discuss about the soil erosion that can be seen in various forms in our country, in one form or another, due to natural factors as well as for the human factors. Natural factors, that there's a lot of natural factors that can lead to soil erosion, like the blowing of wind, like loose soils can get eroded because of wind, water falling up and down slopes, can have soil erosion. So because of water, because of movement of water, wind, glaciers, all these movements have soil erosion, have an impact on soil, and that is why soil gets kind of transported or kind of that get one place from another place. So we can say that is known as soil erosion. Now there can be human factors as well, that is less carefulness of people. When they know that there can be natural factors which can affect the soil, which can have soil erosion, that is why they should take measures to defect the soil erosion, to prevent the soil erosion. And we can see that a lot of kind of wrong plugging methods in our country that are being used by many of the agriculturists that are using those methods, and that is leading towards the soil erosion. So we can say that soil erosion can take place in many forms, like in gullies. Now in gullies, what happens that in a kind of crack water blows, and that will kind of make a gully. So we can say that is a kind of crack being made, and from that water flows and takes the soil away. That is the soil erosion. After that, it can be that from a slope water flows, and after that soil is eroded away. So we can say that there are different ways from soil can be eroded. There can be different ways. All the soil erosion can vary from one place to another. Now there are many methods, many measures for the soil conservation. Mostly one way or another, we are just planting trees in a way. Now firstly, we should do the terrace farming and contour plugging. We should not do the plugging up and down in a mountain area, because that leads to water falling upon the slope, and that leads to soil erosion. We must follow the contour lines of a mountain or the hill, and then we must do the plugging or the cultivation on that. So we can say that contour line plugging is very important, very conservative for the soil, because it kind of prevents the slope falling of the water that is being used by all the farmers in the irrigation. After that, we have the terrace farming. In terrace farming, there are many trees that are kind of planted in those contour lines. That is a kind of making a terrace and then doing farming. So we can say that terrace farming and shelter belts. You know what? That you might have seen shelter belts in many kind of occasions, in many kind of in your everyday life. Now, shelter belts that in a row or in a line, in a column, you could say that there are many trees that are planted in a row, and that prevents the soil erosion, because the roots of those plants or the trees would bind the soil together, and that would prevent the soil erosion by wind or water, except some very exceptional cases, like if there is earthquake or very big flood, then it is obvious, isn't it, that it would lead to soil erosion as well. So in those natural calamities case, except for those cases, it prevents all the soil erosion, because the roots of the plants or the trees bind the soil together very carefully, very strongly, you could say, very powerful they are. So we can say that is very important, that there should be more and more afforestation. You know that in one way or another, we just have to save the soil, don't we? So we have to make it more stronger, bind it together, and that can only be done by planting more and more plants and trees. So we can say that afforestation, directly or indirectly, we just have to save trees for anything, for land, for conserving the land, for conserving the soil, or for conserving the floods, for conserving the water. So we can say that in one way or another, we have to do more and more afforestation in our country. And in our country, there is less percentage of forest than that was decided by National Forest Policy of 1952. So we can say that is all we had discussed in this chapter. One most important thing here that we left was that the Earth Summit in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro. Now Rio de Janeiro, that is a place in Brazil. I may not have pronounced it clearly, but don't mind it. Now that was a place where the first Earth Summit, where more than 100 heads of the states, where more than the heads of more than 100 states were present, and you could say that was the first Earth Summit that was ever seen in our world, in our history, you could say. Now in that, what happened, that there were all matters. There was an Agenda 21 that was discussed, that was brought up by all those heads, and that was generally for all the matters, for all the global crises like global warming and ozone layer depletion, all those things that were affecting the global system. So we can say that was for protecting the earth. So we can say that in that art summit in Rio de Janeiro, was in Brazil, and that was for in 1992. It was for kind of all the matters of global things, of global crisis to protect the earth. There were many hats of different states. Now, state does not mean that in our country the states are going. I'm saying about the state, that is a sovereign state, all the countries or the nations. So we can say that that was the first art summit that was for the conservation of the planet Earth. Now after that, what could you see that is there any difference from that region and now today's modern era and in that era? Let's think about it. So that is all we had discussed in this chapter. Now in this chapter, what we saw was that we discussed about the classification of all the resources. After that, we saw the classification of salts. Now most importantly, there are many chances that in exams these type of questions would be asked. In a map, you would have to show about the type of salts, to show in which region what type of salts are found. So let's recap that. Now black salts that are mostly found in Maharashtra, in the regions of Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, in those regions, and red and yellow salts that are so much found in northeastern states, in Chhattisgarh, in Odisha, in Telangana regions, and in the southern part as well. Ladywright salt that is very little in our country, just in the western coast you could say, and arid salts that are present in only Rajasthan and a very little bit in Gujarat. So you don't have to say Gujarat, you could just say that in Rajasthan, in the desert areas. After that, we have the aloe salt, aloe that are present in Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Jharkhand, in those regions, in northern plains. And after that, we have a little bit in eastern coasts of rivers like Kaveri, Godavari, Krishna, in those rivers, deltas you could say. So in those rivers, deltas, also there are this type of salt, and the salt that we left was that. Now after that, arid will discussed, and forest salt that are only found in Jammu and Kashmir, in Himachal Pradesh, and a little bit in Sikkim region that are connected to Himalayan mountains. So these type of salts are found in these different regions that you must learn about, and they will surely be in your exams as well. So that is all we have discussed in this chapter. Now in this chapter, we saw the classification of resources, type of salts, about the conservation of land resources, land utilization. We saw about different things. So this is all we have discussed in this chapter. Now I've discussed all the topics and subtopics, and the next chapters of this book will be covered in the upcoming video. So thank you very much.